is 6:39 morning to you. You're watching and listening to Breakfast with Stephen and Anne across the UK on TV, on radio and online.
It's time to go through the papers now, and joining us this morning, journalists Nabila Ramdani and Benedict Spence. And there's a lot to talk about today, is there not? Are we going to go through the Are we going to go through the headlines first? Right. We'll bring you up to date then with those. Boris Johnson, of course, big news today, has pledged economic and defensive support to Ukraine following face-to-face talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kiev. The Prime Minister said he made a surprise visit to the capital as a show of solidarity for Ukraine.
We're showing you the papers for some reason. I tell you what, let's ditch out of those headlines because, it's all going technically wrong. The buttons are being pressed in the wrong order.
But that's all right. It's very early in the morning.
It is what we do.
It's 6:40 already.
Adds to the fun. Nabila, let's have a look at the Sunday Express then, should we? Welcome to Kiev, my friend, was how Boris was greeted yesterday.
Yes, indeed, and it's about a story about two heroes, effectively, Boris Johnson and indeed Volodymyr Zelensky. It's effectively, goes on about Boris Johnson's heroic visit to Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and Boris Johnson has been, he's got a thing with terminology and phrases. He's quite good at that, isn't he?
Oh, yeah.
And he very much praised the Ukrainian leader. He said, "You have shown the courage of a lion." And Vladimir, you have given the roar of that lion. So it's, full of praise for the bravery of the Ukrainian leader. And
yes, he said to other world leaders, hasn't he? He said, "Be brave like Boris," which is good for Boris, I guess. But it must have taken a degree of courage and certainly security organisation.
Oh, absolutely.
To land, the UK Prime Minister in Kiev for that meeting. And there they are walking through the streets.
Yes, indeed. And I think what's important here is morale-boosting visits to the Ukrainians by foreign leaders. They're extremely important, and especially if you get into Kiev itself. And they show that the Ukrainians are... And they are defending the capitals as lions, as Boris Johnson pointed out. But I think no matter what your views of Boris Johnson is, I think you have to admire, his bravery in entering a war zone where safety can by no means be guaranteed.
Well, especially, Zelensky is still a man with a target on his back, isn't he?
Yes, indeed. And it begs, the question if Boris Johnson was able to find Zelensky, so can Putin.
What do you think, Benedict?
I think that it demonstrates what a lot of Western intelligence has been saying, which really is that the Russians are pulling back from the north of the country. I don't think, because it's not just obviously Boris Johnson that we've seen. We've also seen Ursula von der Leyen visiting Mr. Zelensky. There's also been suggestions that the Pope might visit Kiev. I don't think that the Pontiff would be visiting Kiev, even this one, if there was any suggestion that the Russians still had the buildup of troops that they did. I think that's very clear that they are pulling back. It's very recent. It's a lot of these plans will have been made well in advance, but
they
nonetheless,
have to wait for their intelligence advisors
to guarantee it. Otherwise,
we think that's safe enough for you to
Yes, otherwise there's no way, I think, that anybody would green-light the number of high-profile people. It's still dangerous now. It's not to say that it's not, but it's very much a sign, I think, that the Russians are taking stock of the situation and recognise that Kiev, whilst they can fight for it, isn't going to fall anytime soon.
Meanwhile, Nabil, I was just going to say in the Sunday Telegraph, Benedict, of course, it's looking at it's not just what happens now, it's what's going to happen in the longer term. And as far as NATO is concerned, strengthening that eastern front is going to have to be a priority.
It is in the north and the east. What this is talking about, this is an interview with Jens Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, where he's talking about a number of things. The headline is obviously full-scale permanent NATO force, and it's talking here specifically about the Baltics, about Estonia and Latvia, which, of course, alongside Ukraine are places that Vladimir Putin and a lot of his acolytes have talked about not really being actual countries, they're being part of Russia. So that's the suggestion there, that there would be a full-time permanent build-up of troops to deter any sort of incursion into the area. Unrelated to this, there's also been lots of talk about Finland joining the alliance on a permanent basis.
Which Finland never really wanted to do before.
I know, and it's because, of course, Finland was invaded by the Soviet Union before and was able to, on the one hand, it was able to repel the Soviet Union, but it did lose a fifth of its territory. And so ever since then, Finland has been on a sort of a semi-permanent war footing, in a similar sort of way that Israel is, for example. they've got military service. They've got about 700,000 people on permanent standby. Every bridge is mined on the off chance.
On amber alert.
Yes, and I think that there is now a sense in a lot of these countries that it's a now or never situation. You know,
Putin, this appears to be exactly what Putin didn't want.
Yeah.
Strengthen NATO, and he seems to have done it.
Although
Having said that, I think the danger of placing NATO troops anywhere near Russia is of course engagement with the Russians, and any
they would see it
the
as
slightest
engagement.
contact with Russia could be used as an excuse by Putin to launch attacks against NATO members, and then we're clearly looking at the World War III scenario.
I mean, I think it's very noticeable that a number of Eastern countries, though, are actually pushing ahead in spite of what their NATO allies are saying. Yeah, we already know that the US shot down the plan for Slovakia to send MiGs, but Slovakia want to do it anyway. The Poles are very, very sort of aggressive on this. They think that there should be no more sort of appeasement of Russia. The Czechs are sending tanks, and this is coming whilst other NATO members are saying, well, we should perhaps tread a little bit carefully. I think Russia's immediate neighbours are being a lot more assertive about this, and I don't think they're leaving their own allies in the alliance much leeway, no matter how powerful the US or Germany might be. Ultimately, if your partners are saying, well, this is the direction we feel that we're going, and here is Ukraine, for an example, I kind of feel that the rest of the alliance will end up being dragged along with them.
Wow.
What about your personal assessment of Boris actually doing this? Getting on a plane and doing it by surprise, landing there yesterday. What do you think
He looked
personally?
incredibly calm and relaxed given the circumstances, but he was not there just to shake hands and for the photo opportunities, which clearly is the case because it's all on the front pages of the Sunday papers. But he went there and pledged more arms to the Ukrainians to go with the sanctions and indeed with the diplomatic measures. And it has to be said that the juxtaposition of that visit and also the pictures that are still coming out of the Ukraine, demonic pictures about killings of civilian populations, it just reminds us how barbaric this conflict is really, and that something needs to be done to put an end to it.
Does it change your personal assessment of Boris?
I mean, domestically, I still think he's been an abject failure, but he has, on the international stage, led the way, and he deserves all the credit in the world for that. I think we always liked to joke, didn't he, that he saw himself as a bit of a Churchillian figure. He has stepped up to the plate actually when that was required of him, and so I think you can very justifiably say, taking the two things separately, he has been a real letdown for a lot of people domestically. But as a statesman, I think it's very difficult to fault him, no matter how much a lot of his adversaries would like to.
Okay.
And even
I was going to say, your views on that would be very welcome. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Look, can we move away from the Prime Minister just a moment to have a look at the Chancellor in the Mail on Sunday, Nabila? I mean, they're saying that his political career is now on the brink. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, there's he's been having a very difficult week, it has to be said, and the Mail on Sunday effectively saying that he's battling for his political career.
He's having to sort of make up his mind whether he wants a political career or not now.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there are astonishing claims that he broke U.S. immigration rules, for example, that his political opponents are asking that the White House investigate why the Chancellor possessed a U.S. green card until last October. The card puts the holder on the path to U.S. citizenship, so he has to make up his mind whether he wants to be British or American. And if they declare their intention to make America the permanent home and indeed pay the tax there, so it boils down to a question of loyalty, doesn't it?
Well, he's already moved his family out of number 11, apparently, because they're so fed up with all of the recent publicity they've had, and the fact that his wife the focus has been so much on his wife and her money. And there are hints, I think at least in one of the papers today, that he may be thinking of moving out himself. Now, that would be the first time ever a Chancellor has not lived over the shop, as it were. Does that suggest he's really serious about the job anymore?
Well, I think it suggests more crucially that what Treasurer's career politics is, and I think he was the shining star of the Tory party a few days ago, but now he's gone crashing down, and all, he's a... And he's a fabulously rich man in his own right and indeed by marriage, and it doesn't sit well.
I heard an analysis quite some time ago actually saying I mean, he's never had the lows before. I mean, he's been in politics, sort of trundled along, as if you like, and then had all the highs of the furlough scheme and everyone loving what he was doing. And now that it's gone the other way, he's
How long
not
do you
used
live
to
in
it.
Benedict in number 11?
Oh, I think actually he could hold on for quite some time. I mean, what I think is very interesting is if we were to, say, juxtapose this with the misadventures of the Prime Minister, who is able to sort of bat off anything at all. I actually think that if Mr. Sunak wanted to, he could just batten down the hatches and that he would survive, because I actually don't think that, I think that it's very misguided what he's done, keeping citizenship or a green card of one country, or his wife not being domiciled in the UK. But I do think that these things are survivable. He's taken a bit of a dip in the polls, sure, because there is a cost of living crisis going on. We all understand why that is.
24 points.
But I do think, it is a significant one, but the Prime Minister himself is managing to bounce back from a quite significant one very slowly. I think you need that kind of resilience. If you have it within you, I don't see why you can't drag it back. The Labour Party themselves have been able to, Keir Starmer started off with pretty low ratings and is slowly managing to pull this thing up. But I would say very quickly, it's interesting, isn't it? Because earlier on in the show you were discussing what would you do if you had 55 million, would you go to the International Space Station? And, this idea that there are people out there in the world for whom this is sort of small change. Yeah. But what the Times talks about is that not being domiciled in the UK has saved the Chancellor's wife approximately 20 million in taxes. It may be not very much money to people like this, but very wealthy people don't get very wealthy or stay very wealthy by frittering their money away. So I do sort of understand why the Chancellor, he was very fabulously wealthy before, his wife is even more fabulously wealthy, her family is. He might be sitting here saying, actually, is it worth it? When actually I have everything in the world at my disposal to become and stay very powerful, very influential, away from politics. That's not the only route to power.
Having said that, I think there's more than a whiff of hypocrisy, because the British Chancellor is meant to be utterly committed to Britain's financial success. And the fact that we are seeing his wife, who appears to have more fiscal loyalty to overseas countries, not least of all her native India, has rightly angered millions of voters. I think, any politicians who qualify a defence by saying, we've done nothing illegal, then, they're in serious trouble.
Yeah, well, we need to leave it there. Nabila, Benedict, thank you both very much indeed. We'll catch up with you a little bit later on. Rishi, just put your feet up. Relax.
Why take the
Have some champagne or something.
But as we keep saying, who would want to be a politician at the moment?
Don't know. Not when you've got that sort of money. Anyway,
Go to the space station.
Go to the space station.
Just like that.
It is